Hello, and welcome to another Uncomfortably Candid podcast. I wanted to talk to you about something today that came up in conversation recently, and it just really hit home because it's something that I struggled with for so long. And I may have talked about this before in another podcast, but when we are, when we haven't learned how to regulate our emotions and process our emotions in a healthy way, we tend to be passive aggressive or just aggressive, blow up and holding in all of our emotions until we blow up like a volcano. And we get labeled as crazy, toxic, overly sensitive, too emotional. And that can lead to enabling and empowerment in a relationship. And that's what I want to talk about today. Because when the person that we're in a relationship with has known us um, in our people pleasing days where we acted like we didn't have negative emotions and needs until we absolutely became 100% bitter and resentful and blew up. Whenever we put in the work and we start to become emotionally intelligent, they still may put up a fence or like put up a guard or even um, just automatically like, say that they don't want to deal with it because they think that it's going to be way bigger of a deal than it actually is because it used to be. But because you're working on it, it's actually not. But you, they say something to the effect of, I don't want to deal with this right now because you're just too emotional, and when that starts getting said over and over and over again, one, you don't even have the opportunity to um, practice what you're learning, like put into play, asking for what you need, expressing yourself in a healthy way, because they just automatically, put up a fence. But in order for you in the future to not get labeled as too emotional or toxic, you start to just continue to people please. Um, and it's a form of people pleasing where, and I think I've talked about this before, but it's a backwards form of control, um, where you're controlling them by pleasing them. So it's not a direct form of control, it's an indirect form of control, and it's enabling. It's enabling that other person from growing themselves and also from the relationship from growing. Because when you enable them, you're disempowering them and you're disempowering yourself. And when we're so worried about appeasing them, and this is appeasing is a coping mechanism, and it's called fawning. And I've talked about this on social media before, but it is a stress response and a coping mechanism called fawning. And it's where you do whatever you can to appease the threat so it will go away. And when you do that, it's taking on false responsibility because you are taking on the responsibility of the emotion of the other person. False responsibility will it will keep you in chains. It is so freeing when you understand that you can only control yourself and you're only responsible for yourself. And that doesn't mean we can go around doing whatever we want to do to other people because we're not responsible for them or their emotions. If we're in a relationship with other people, then we have a responsibility for ourselves to healthily express our emotions to that other person. But we're not responsible for them, and we shouldn't be taking on false responsibility for their emotions because that can lead to codependency. And codependency is part of anxious attachment, where you feel like you are just being hyperactive in doing whatever you can to make the relationship work. So I hope this encourages you to, one, be aware of when this is happening. Am I enabling this other person and disempowering myself and them? How am I enabling them, and what can I do? What can I do to change it? And it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be so uncomfortable. But the health of your relationship and your health is worth it. And it's probably going to require you to set some boundaries that are, again, going to be uncomfortable. But you have to ask yourself, especially if this is someone that you're married to, or if this is someone in your family and you can't just, distance yourself from that person, you're going to have to set some boundaries. So this is probably a short one, but it came up in conversation, and it's just important to me as a recovering people pleaser that we find freedom in these aspects. And I'm called to empower people. I feel like, Jesus called us to empower other people, and sometimes that's uncomfortable. And I want people to empower me. If I'm acting in a certain way and they're doing things to appease me and keep me in that same unhealthy spot, like I don't want that. Like I want relationships that are going to challenge me and grow me. And that's why I thought it was so important to talk to you about this, because I know what this feels like. And it was part of me for so long. And it was not enjoyable. It was not enjoyable because I wasn't able to be myself in my relationships because I was so worried about the other people emotions. Like, oh, is what I'm going to say going to make them sad or disappointed in me, and we can only worry about that to a certain extent, especially when you are over here miserable and they think the relationship's okay because you're doing everything in your power to make sure that it is on their end. But they're not doing that same thing for you, and that just builds bitterness and resentment. And, if they were around when you were having trouble, regulating your emotions and expressing yourself in a healthy way, and they're putting up these fences, you can't even practice what you're working on and what you're putting in the hard work on. So if they're not going to allow you to do that, then boundaries and saying no, which I've talked about in another episode, is going to be your best bet. So, anyway, thank you for listening. And you can go to my website to get in the loop, and I will see you next time.